It's like this tree image is really cool. This is the basic framework. We did a lot of this stuff, grounding and welcoming and introduction, and then going into a little more about thinking about empathy and deep listening and how to access it. Practicing and to do some practicing, and that'll be in triads or threes, and then going a little deeper in the same group. We'll talk a little bit about blocks of empathy, how we can cultivate and practice together, and then connecting feelings and needs together. I already mentioned that briefly. A break. We may skip the break now because of having shorter time, but we'll see where we get to. And then a practice again. And that may be the end for today, depending on where we land. But if we do have a little time, might go a little bit into building a community of listening, how to set up a space for listening, facilitating, and there was another practice in there about feedback and learning together. But we may not reach it, but we'll keep doing training, so don't worry, keep going. And then this is a quote that I love. I don't know exactly where it comes from, the Buddhist world. I think it's just by listening deeply, we already alleviate much pain and suffering in the world. And I want to add to that it's an important because it changes our heart, and I think it can change the way we are motivated to move as well. So it's not just that we listen and that makes everything better, but I think it changes the way we are in the world. So that's my thoughts on that. And then, so there's the basic question, the motivating here. And then I want to show you, which is, what does it mean? How do we get access to this kind of deep embodied listening? And I'm going to show you a little video. It's just 2 minutes and 50 from Brené Brown, who does a lot of research with empathy work. So you may be familiar. Oops, actually, what happened there? It didn't let me play it. There we go.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people.
I want to pause it briefly there. It's a short video, but I want you to know, if you're willing, it's very interesting. These are cartoon characters, but the facial expressions and gestures that are being made are really quite interesting to me. There's nodding and lots of, even just in like very simple amounts of information. So it's very, this can be very helpful to pay attention to.
And then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So what makes things better? I just wanted to repeat the last line she said there, which is what makes things better is actually connection. So, and not necessarily trying to fix or respond. So that's a really helpful piece of information, I think. Powerful. So she just mentioned these two words. So I just wanted to throw up the sort of standard definitions, and it's not necessary. They're maybe broader. The words themselves and the meanings are very rich, and they're quite nuanced. And this ability to understand about empathy and sympathy being more of a feeling of pity or sorrow. And sympathy is not necessarily bad. I think she kind of puts it in the negative category, but I think empathy and sympathy can sometimes go together when there's a sense of wanting to understand and also feeling sorry. So, but when we're distanced from someone else's pain and there's that wall, and you could see that in what she was sharing, that's where the disconnection happens, and it's hard then to be of support there. For me, this is this little bit of a switch. This practice begins in the body, and that's why I was calling your attention to the body language, even of these figures, that we know what's important in ourselves because we have a body. We feel pain, we feel it in our bodies. We're hungry, we're thirsty. When the emotion is very strong, we feel it in our chest, in our gut, and our face, our eyes, we cry. So it's just the way to be so for me, and one of the core elements is just being in touch with the body. And that's why I focus, I'll get to that, but it tells us a lot about what's really going on, like in the moment. If we get abstract, like into ideas, and we lose contact with the body, we may not be talking about what's really alive, what's really going on, what we are really doing. So when we're talking about the body, it's actually the nervous system we're talking about. The nervous system innervates the whole body and tells our brain, tells our consciousness what's happening. So that's important to know. And these sides, I don't like to go too much into the science, but the two sides of our nervous system, one is that kind of activate us, and these are not good or bad sides. They're both essential for life. Like, one activates us and gives us energy, and extreme forms of activation take us towards survival, like intense anger or wanting to fight or to run away or to kind of collapse. So, but on the other side, part of our nervous system is a rest, relax, and connect side. And so when we start to ground, and that part of the nervous system, parasympathetic, that's this sort of resting system, it allows us to connect out. So it's a natural process. So that's why working with the body and grounding as a practice is super important. It's called the social engagement system. It's like a technical term, but whatever you want to call it, it's this energy. And you saw in the video there too, that same thing of like being with the body is how we connect. And so just even doing this for yourself now, if you want to try it, it's like this field of energy, it changes what's going on for us. So just like giving ourselves that ability and freedom to feel and use our body to ground is very powerful. So I encourage you, sometimes socially we're conditioned to be kind of in straitjackets. And so working with that is part of the practice of listening, actually working with our bodies. So I just put it there, slowing down and grounding, the most important elements in my view, because of how it connects to the nervous system and to these deep parts of us that are made to connect out, but they don't run until we feel safe enough to reach out. So very important. And what it's saying there is it's kind of innate for us. We can move into it. There are things that block us, and we'll get into that in the next section, but that's pretty much the main. Now, this is a little more technical. If you don't take this away, that's fine. She mentioned a few different kinds of empathy. I wanted to list the 5 that I'm aware of. I've taken this from the work of Dan Siegel. Resonant empathy, it's that sense of where the storm cloud is over both people. It's that sense of feeling with someone else. And this also is why grounding is super important, because if the feeling is very strong in the other person, containing that feeling in yourself takes work, takes energy. So what you can first of all offer someone else is that sense of grounding and containing that feeling as it lives in you. And that's often one of the things that blocks, is just it's too intense to feel, or like we don't feel comfortable in ourselves with that particular feeling. So that's a ground-based level. The perspective taking is really important, where we can just like see like, oh yeah, I see what you see. If I were in your shoes, that's what I'd want too. Very powerful, also pretty straightforward. Cognitive empathy is just taking that one step further, which is kind of reasoning a little bit about connecting the past and the future together, and the present, and like our planning mind, and what we want, what we actually want to have happen. Like, I feel upset and I want something. It's either I want you to listen to me, or I want you to, or I want a glass of water. I'm super thirsty. It could be a million different things, but like connecting that information together is really what cognitive. Also, it's just called understanding, if you want. But empathic concern is compassion. It's another way of like, it's another layer where it kind of turns into a wish to do something. Like, so we're with the feeling. That's one kind of empathy. We're just feeling it with someone. And then we can understand it. We can know why. We can see it from their point of view, and we can understand why. But then there's this next thing, which is like, it actually activates the motor cortex of our brain. It moves us to act, like we want to do something. And so that's really powerful. That's the part of the listening I was talking about, where it changes who we are, because we want to move into responding. And one of the things we do is really slow. A lot of times what happens with our listening is we want to go past 1, 2, and 3 straight to 4. And it's like you want a sandwich, right? That's what the woman says the person says in the video. And it's kind of bypassing the whole process there, right? It's still trying to meet a need for that person, but it's not the actual one that person has. Does that make sense? So it's because we don't want to deal with, or we don't have time, or there's many reasons that might happen. The last one is really important to name. In the video, you see the person going into the hole, and it's like, oh, this is really difficult. And it's also possible to empathize with someone when things are going well, to celebrate together, like to feel joy together. I'm doing what I want, and my needs are being met. I'm being fulfilled somehow in this moment, and you can feel that with me. And that's a super powerful dimension of empathy that's really important to cultivate. Okay, we made it to here. I'm going to do a time check. Well, that's good. I mean, I was hoping to be a little further along, but it's not too bad. We have a chance. The idea now is to like practice together in groups of 3. And to go around, each person shares like we did the other round. And this time to be like, if you're listening, so one person will share, and then the person who's next to share will do the listening. And you'll be like that, I don't know, the bear character in some way. But we're not going to share super deep, like the worst thing that happened. It's just something that you're grateful for and something that's challenging, a little challenging. Don't go too deep, just there's one small challenge. If you don't want to do either one of those, that's fine, you can pass. But then there's that sense of like being with the person sharing and slowing down and receiving it. And just the part I want to do today, for this round, is the perspective taking, where when you see it from that person's point of view, it's like, okay, I see that, this is what was going on for you. And to reflect, that's why we sometimes call it a reflection, because it's like, oh, it's like a mirror. You become a mirror for that person, right? To see if they see themselves in you and if you got it right. And the great thing about doing this work is just being there is already amazing. So mostly we want to get it right. This is our cultural training. Most of us, not everyone, but who went to school, we get graded like you did a good job, you get an A. And that creates a framework in our minds and our bodies where we have to do things. There's a tension that we want to do things well. And so noticing that and how that lives in you, and there's no right and wrong. It's just to be there. So we get to step out of that a little bit if you can. That's the basic idea. And I want to give a brief model, so I'm going to stop. And there we are. Okay, going deeper. So let's go a little bit deeper into this listening practice. I just wanted to name some of the things that tend to block empathy, because it's like, oh, you might be saying like, oh, this is natural, like this happens naturally. Why is it so hard for me to listen? Well, there's a lot of things that impact it, actually. When we're stressed, like that other part of our nervous system is more activated. It's harder to do. When we're tired, the brain and the nervous system are just not working well. Our attention is limited. So wanting to do it right, I'll just name that cultural element. We already talked about it, like distraction and switching focus is one of the biggest blocks to empathy. And it's not just like my attention maybe goes to something else while the person is in front of me. That might be important. Like I might just be like, well, I'm on the street, so I have to pay attention to what's going on around me. It's hard to listen in that environment. So an environment where I can focus is really important. Sometimes we're listening to someone and we start to empathize with what they're talking about. Maybe they're talking about a conflict that they had with someone you know. And you start empathizing with that person and not with them, right? So you can lose them and be like, oh, you're wrong, right? That's not the way I see it. So switching our focus is one of the big challenges. And that's why some kind of training around practice and presence is very powerful. Social conditioning, it's not okay to listen. It's not okay to feel what other people feel. That's one of the biggest challenges, I would say, is what Fred Rogers has spent his whole life saying, right? It's okay to feel, because in our culture, it's often not okay to feel certain things. And then this wish to bypass and jump right into fixing, gathering information, questioning, diagnosing. The last one is probably the biggest, most complex category. It's unresolved traumatic memory. It's a bit of a technical term. Some people would just say trauma, but I like to be really specific about that, because trauma is part of life. It's like when you have a life threat. That's something that activates the fight freeze process in your body. Whether that impacts you later on depends on whether you get to resolve that. So it can get encoded and locked up if it's not resolved. It can also be transmitted by ancestors. So that's one of the reasons why when people mention anti-racism work, doing that work, like knowing that part of trauma is that it's generational, that just your appearance of your body might activate someone on a stress level a little bit. Like they're feeling stress in the body, some activation, fight, flight, energy, just because of how you look. It's not a choice that you made, but it's because of past conditioning that person carries. So being okay with that, and like being able to know that's a real thing, is also another kind of power, because we can listen into the body on that level as well. This is a really long list. I have often found when doing this work, like it's hard to explain exactly what is empathy, and sometimes a little easier to list some of the things that we do instead of empathy, or working for understanding, which is like questioning, like what happened then, or why did you do that, or that kind of approach, or like, oh, you think that's bad, let me tell you about what happened to me, or oh, that's terrible, like feeding the fire, or okay, let me tell you what you should do about it, giving advice, let me tell you my story. It's a long list. I'm gonna bypass a little bit of this, but there's a lot of things that we sometimes want to do to make things better, or to get away from a feeling. And they're not necessarily bad, but they're not a great starting point often, because if we haven't understood and we start trying to fix things, there's that connection is missing. Okay, next. So this is where I wanted to get to with the needs that I thought was really important, that was coming up in some of our discussion, that this cognitive empathy part, or just simply understanding, if you don't want to use a big word, is about connecting what we feel to what we want or need or value. So, and for other people too. So everything we feel, you can think of, has a ground. It's not arbitrary. We feel things because things are important, because there's information there. I'm sad because I lost my wallet, right? So there's a feeling, right? And there's a reason. Now, I said because I lost my wallet, but it's actually not getting into the deeper layer of what did I really want, right? What happened that I didn't want to happen, or something, like losing my wallet's one thing, but there's something that's important about that, the wallet, and understanding that is where we get to the cognitive empathy. So we talk about met and unmet needs. And when we're doing this work, it's about, and this is from nonviolent communication, but it's, I think it can be found in almost any, it's just one framework. There's a lot of ways to think about it, but the things that we want and are important to us come from having a body and being a human being, and therefore universal for the most part. Food, water, shelter. Let me go to the next. So all these things are universal. And then we feel different things in relation to those needs. Like I can also say I feel joy because I'm in the mountains, right? Or I'm in the forest. And there's a need under there, maybe. What is that need? We could be curious, but there's fulfilled and unfulfilled feelings that connect to met and unmet needs. I put this thing in about connecting requests, and this really has to do with the questions that you were all asking, which is, how do we do this dance of inserting ourselves and going back and forth, and who does what where? And that comes down to the meeting the need for connection. It's all about connection. When we're having a dialogue with someone, it's either I'm meeting my own need for connection or I'm trying to meet your need for connection. And I might do that in a lot of different ways. I could ask you a question like, hey, would you explain that part to me? I didn't understand it. Mark did it. Was it basil? Oh no, it was bagels. Oh, bagels. I got it, right? I want to understand. I want to understand you. I'm connecting to you. So would it be all right if I told you how that makes me feel listening to you, right? There's this way, maybe it will meet your need for connecting to me, right? Like maybe you want to connect to me. So knowing how I feel about what you're saying is important. So those are connecting requests, but again, it's about meeting needs, and that's a special category. So that's why I named it specifically connecting requests, and developing your own language around how to do that is really important, really valuable. I don't have stock phrases for you, but you can read Marshall Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication. You can find resources and work that out. But this is a lot of information on this slide, but needs, values, just to list some of them: connection, well-being, honesty, play. Physical well-being is like the food, water, shelter stuff. Honesty, play, peace, autonomy, meaning. There's lots of, those are just, these are just categories. Underneath those, you can come up with lots of specific ones. You can see some of the fulfilled feelings. Exhilarated might be not one that we use a lot. Sometimes culturally, certain feelings are more oppressed, if you want, than others. And sometimes certain feelings are oppressed for certain classes of people, gender, race, what you're allowed to feel. So that's important to reclaim. Part of this practice is reclaiming our power, is about being able to express and feel, which is connected to listen. Okay, we were supposed to have a break here, but because we only have 15 minutes left, if we're gonna end at 6, I wanna do a practice, so we'll skip the break. And this time, we're gonna give you 10 minutes, but we're not gonna do a round this time. And this is just because of time limitations. And we're gonna do one person share. So I would suggest that it be the second person could do it, but you can work it out among yourselves. Whoever seems most, second or third person, it could be any of you, but just to give it a frame. And then the one person, so let's have the second person share and the third person be the holder of that sharing, and the first person will be like a facilitator, just kind of holding the space a little bit. And it's the same exact practice, slowing down, but this time maybe making a guess about a feeling and a need. One thing I didn't do is say what the needs were under my things. Like, I feel sad because I lost my wallet. Maybe my need is something like to be more responsible with, or be more careful. I want more care for myself somehow, to take care of myself better. Or maybe, so for, I feel joyful because I'm in the mountains, it might be a need for connection to nature, or beauty is sometimes the need that's named around that. Now, you might not have language for all the kinds of needs and things, so just, you know, use your gut feeling. This is a little bit, it might be a stretch for you, but think about, oh, is this a need that everyone has? That's one way to say it. And when you're making a guess about the feeling, you can say, oh, I'm wondering if you're feeling this because of this thing, and is the need this? You can guess, like, see if the feeling also is something that lives in the body. That's a way to tell if it's a real feeling, sort of not just a more of a conceptual thing. It vibrates in us somehow. Risk, it's a little uncomfortable. It can also be risky if we make a guess about something or we step on someone's toes. There can be hurt when we start to go into spaces of practice. So, but fortunately, if we slow down and we set some parameters around safety and care, some intentions, which I had intended to read for you, the Listening Circle's vision statement, which is all about creating a space of safety and understanding and autonomy and respect for each other's differences, and making agreements together, which is on our website. So you have a link to the website so you can go and look through it. But and also there's some facilitation that's helpful, like where we can kind of work on it together. And sometimes there is challenges and hurt does happen, and that's happened in circles that we've been a part of, that I've been a part of. And then it's a process of doing more listening, because it's just more information. I'm hurt, right? And something didn't go the way I wanted it in the circle. So we keep listening and we keep learning about it. So that's, and another big factor that's hard to do listening around is that we in terms of facilitating, is like, we want to get it right. And if we want to help each other, sometimes we feel shame around being guided or coaching each other. And that's also a kind of challenge I'll just name. So I put some notes up there for facilitating. In terms of being a facilitator, it's kind of grounding yourself really and holding the whole, thinking about the needs of the whole circle and what's happening in the circle and what people might need, and lots of pausing, lots of slowing down, and knowing that you can't be perfect, and it's about the messiness of being human. So that's can empower you, hopefully, to think about taking on. And we may do a facilitation training at some point. Distraction is natural. It's okay. It happens. We forget. We miss things. Asking for support. Hey, I didn't catch that. I missed that. Can you say that again? It's a connecting request. So there was going to be one more practice if we had 3 hours, but we'll do that another time. These are the words that I wanted to close with, which is just part of thinking about feelings and needs is like, what would it be like to imagine a world where our value comes from not what we do as a job, like we get paid for, but the fact that we're alive and we're alive, we're living beings, and that our needs matter, where we can give and receive freely to meet each other's needs. So that's the vision and the power of a framework of listening that is not about getting something or solving something or fixing something, but about touching some kind of common ground, human ground, as that every being has feelings and needs on some level, and that relationship and connection is something we can touch into and really start to explore how to meet those things. So that's what I want to end with. There's some resources. We're going to send you an email with more links and stuff, and the links to these slides. So don't worry about missing any